I don't even remember the rest of the movie. Seated on the edge of my couch, my attention had shifted from the linen cupboard and was locked onto my phone lying on the coffee table. The scenes on the screen became a blur as my mind fixated on one pressing thought. Eventually, I reached for the phone with a mix of trepidation and urgency, texting my friend to ask if Dormono was okay and what had happened. Minutes stretched like hours until her reply finally lit up my screen. Dormono is okay, but he contracted a very rare bacterium that dissolves cartilage. The doctors managed to stop it, but Dormono lost the tip of his nose and part of his left ear. The dude was a terrible boyfriend, so trust me, I'm not heartbroken. Yet I can't help but feel a pang of pity for him. Now, onto the juicy stuff. I wanted to give you the latest Jakarta gossip, but it can't fit into a text. I will email you tomorrow. Plus, there are new episodes of that series I told you about. Watch it so we can dish. Good luck with those Perth guys. Love you. My heart was still racing, caught between disbelief and a strange sense of detachment. The room felt both small and infinite, the weight of her words sinking in. Here I was, alone with the storm of emotions triggered by a few lines of text. All I could think about was the small wooden box containing the Jenglot. My eyes once again drifted to the linen cupboard, where it sat concealed from the casual observer but ever present in my mind. The air felt thick and suffocating as questions swirled in my head. This had to be a bizarre coincidence. It had to be. A wave of claustrophobia and nervousness washed over me, my heart pounding against my ribcage. Was this my fault? In a moment of stubbornness, did I unknowingly invoke some sort of retribution for Dormono, just to prove my granddad's note to be absurd? Had the Jenglot listened to my wish? As these thoughts consumed me, I felt a need to talk to someone. I briefly thought about texting my friend and telling her the entire story but stopped myself. Suddenly, it was as though Salatiga had found its way into Perth, the strange and supernatural now looming large in my reality. The once distant and exotic had become a personal and immediate menace, pulling me into a web of fear and uncertainty. My pulse quickened, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched through the linen cupboard, judged by some unseen force. The linen cupboard seemed to grow larger in my peripheral vision, dominating the room and my thoughts. I felt as though I was teetering on the edge of sanity, the lines between coincidence and causality blurring into an indistinguishable haze. For the next couple of days, I threw myself into work and social media, desperately attempting to drown out the relentless echoes of guilt that gnawed at my conscience. No matter how hard I tried, my efforts were futile. The weight of what had transpired loomed over me like a dark cloud, refusing to dissipate. Each time I closed my eyes, the haunting memories resurfaced. I could still visualize the Tupperware container on the bedstand, the wooden box on the bed, and I could still hear my spoken words. It was as if the fragments of my broken mind had latched onto that one night in Salatiga, fixated upon the unfathomable occurrence that could possibly change my view on the paranormal and change my view on everything. It couldn't be real. It just couldn't be connected to the Jenglot and that night. It had to be impossible. Yet, the whispers in the dark, the uncanny chill that sat in the pit of my stomach, they all told a different story. My attempts to rationalize the events only further plunged me into a spiral of anxiety. Every thought seemed to come back to Dormono and the cursed Jenglot entity that haunted my nightmares. I was trapped in a relentless loop, unable to break free from the invisible chains of fear and guilt. And the worst part was, I couldn't confide in anyone. The burden was mine to bear alone, knowing that even daring to speak of it would sound like the deranged ravings of a madwoman. If I ever wanted to sleep soundly again, I needed to prove to myself once and for all that this madness was nothing more than a series of coincidental events and that I could absolve my conscience of any guilt. There was only one way to do that. I had to complete another test. I had to. It was the only way to put my mind at ease. My heart raced as I found a local butchery, just within walking distance from my apartment. The thought of what I was about to do sent chills down my spine, but I forced myself to remain composed. The line clicked, and a gruff voice answered. I ordered a single serving of pig's blood. I explained that I was going to attempt a blood sausage recipe given to me by my aunt. The person on the other end of the connection informed me that they could help me, but since my order is not something they stock regularly, my parcel would be ready for collection in 2 days. 2 days. 48 hours. It felt like an eternity. But now, there was no turning back. I had set the wheels in motion. The anticipation, the fear, and the doubt gnawed at my insides as I tried to convince myself that this test would finally lay everything to rest. Now, all that remained was to wait. And in those endless hours, every creak of my apartment, every shadow in the corner of my eye, every fleeting sound, would fuel the ever-growing tension that coiled tightly within me. I clung to the faint hope that this test would liberate me from the clutches of my own mind, but deep down, a sinister voice whispered that I might be stepping further into the unknown. I needed a test subject, and I had to choose carefully. This time, I would wish for something nice, something seemingly implausible. A wish so extraordinary that my logical mind could dismiss any supernatural connection. It was the only way to convince myself that the Jenglot's supposed powers were nothing but a figment of my imagination. This was how I was going to reclaim my sanity. After relentless deliberation, I decided on a girl from work, a relatively new hire whom I'd only seen during staff meetings online. I had noticed her fumbling her way through presentations, her nervousness palpable even through the screen. Whispers around the office hinted at management's regrets over appointing her, and I couldn't help but agree. Her incompetence made her the perfect candidate for my test. A wish coming true for her would be nothing short of miraculous, a clear indication that this was all just a coincidence. I buried myself in her profile, scouring for every detail that could help shape my wish. I knew it had to be something significant yet kind-hearted, something that would undeniably stand out. Perhaps a well-deserved promotion despite her flaws, or a sudden surge in confidence to tackle her duties. I needed this wish to be so outlandish that it obliterated any lingering doubts about the Jenglot's power. As I meticulously planned my wish, a knot of anxiety twisted tighter in my stomach. I had to be sure that this test was flawless, that it left no room for ambiguity. The stakes were too high, and my sanity hung by a thread. I couldn't afford for this to go wrong, hoping against hope that this test would finally set me free from the torment that plagued my mind. But as the hours dwindled down, the tension inside me grew. What if I was wrong? What if the Jenglot's powers were real? The dark whispers in the back of my mind threatened to undermine my resolve, and every shadow seemed to harbor a hidden truth. I was on the brink of discovery or descent into madness. Finally, the notification buzzed on my phone, startling me in the heavy quiet of the late afternoon. A message from an unfamiliar number: "Your parcel is ready for collection at the butchery." My stomach knotted as I stared at the words, their normalcy belied by the gnawing unease they stirred. The butchery was tucked into a shadowed corner of the street, its red neon sign humming faintly. Inside, the scent of raw meat was nearly suffocating, and the heavy silence was broken only by the rhythmic hum of refrigeration units. A man with a blood-stained apron appeared from the back, his eyes scanning me with an unreadable expression. He didn't ask for my name, just handed over a plain brown package, heavier than I'd expected. He nodded once, curtly, before retreating through the swinging doors. I stood there for a moment, the package pressing into my hands, my pulse thudding in my ears. The walk back to my apartment felt longer than usual, the weight of the parcel amplifying the oppressive stillness of the night. Every step seemed to echo in the empty streets, my breath fogging in the cold air. Back home, I locked the door behind me and double-checked the latch. The parcel sat on the table, innocuous and unassuming, but the sight of it made my stomach turn with nervous energy. I didn't open it, not yet. Instead, I turned on every light in the apartment, trying to banish the encroaching shadows, and steeled myself for what lay ahead. Tonight wasn't going to be easy, yet I had to know. I had to open that cupboard and face whatever lay inside, even if it meant confronting the darkest corners of my mind. With trembling hands, I took a step toward the linen cupboard, the wooden floorboards groaning under my weight. My breath hitched, and the world around me seemed to slow down, every second stretching into an eternity. This was it. The moment where I would either dispel my fears or succumb to them. The Jenglot's hold on my mind was undeniable, and I had to see if it was truly responsible for the eerie coincidences that had plagued me. My fingers hovered over the cupboard handle, the anticipation almost unbearable. One twist, and I would unveil the mystery that had entwined itself with my fate. My hands hovered for a moment before I opened the linen cupboard, its hinges creaking faintly in the quiet of the apartment. Inside, on the top shelf, sat the small wooden box, unassuming yet somehow heavy with significance. It had been there for weeks, untouched, almost forgotten, or at least that's what I told myself. I exhaled sharply, reached for it, and felt the cool, rough surface under my fingertips. Cradling the box, I carried it to the spare room. The air in the room was still, carrying that faint, musty scent that lingered in spaces seldom used. I placed the box carefully on the neatly made bed, its heavy weight seeming to press into the mattress as though it carried more than it should. I crossed the room to the small desk opposite the bed, my footsteps muffled on the thin carpet. The pet monitoring camera sat precisely where I had left it, a single blinking light indicating it was ready. I adjusted the angle, ensuring it captured the box in its entirety. The feed popped up on my phone screen as I opened the app. The image was clear, the wooden box sitting starkly in the middle of the bed like an artifact in a museum display. Satisfied, I nodded to myself, though my heart was beginning to pound harder than I liked to admit. I returned to the living room and retrieved the parcel, still sealed in its innocuous brown paper bag. Sitting at the coffee table earlier, I had hesitated to open it, half expecting something to leap out. Now, I carried it into the spare room with deliberate steps. The bag crinkled softly as I tore it open, pulling out a round plastic container. The liquid inside was dark and thick, catching the light in an almost metallic way. A faint, unmistakable tang of copper tickled my nose, and I recoiled slightly before setting the container down on the bedstand, inches from the box. The preparation was done. All the pieces were in place. My heart thudded harder in my chest, and I wiped my damp palms on my jeans. I had rehearsed the words 100 times, turning them over in my mind, chiseling them down to their most precise and harmless form. No risks. No misinterpretations. This would be a test, controlled and simple. No one would get hurt. I cleared my throat, the sound startlingly loud in the room's charged silence. Then, steadying my voice, I spoke. I wish Shannon from work gets a big promotion. The words hung in the air, weighty and fragile. I stood there for a moment, my ears straining for something, anything, but there was only the faint hum of city traffic. Satisfied, I stepped back, resisting the urge to linger. I flicked one last glance at the setup, the box, the container, the pet camera, all bathed in the pale overhead light, then left the room. My hand trembled slightly as I closed the door behind me, the latch clicking with finality. I stood in the hallway for a moment, staring at the closed door. The apartment felt different now, like the air had shifted and thickened. I shook it off and retreated to the living room, every sound amplified in the quiet. And then I waited. I opened the pet monitoring app on my phone, my thumb hovering over the icon for a moment before pressing it. The feed loaded quickly, the small wooden box appearing on the screen, bathed in the cold, sterile light of the spare room. I adjusted the volume, not expecting to hear anything but still needing to feel in control. A tiny red dot in the corner of the screen confirmed it was recording. That small assurance did little to calm my nerves. I watched the feed, my eyes darting between the box on the screen and the actual phone in my hand, as if something might escape my notice in the seconds it took to blink. The minutes dragged into hours, the faint hum of the traffic punctuated only by the occasional groan of the wall settling. Midnight crept closer, each tick of the clock amplifying the stillness that seemed to press in around me. Maybe this was ridiculous. Maybe I was ridiculous. The thought echoed in my mind, a desperate grasp at reason. It would be a relief, I admitted, if all of this turned out to be nothing, a silly experiment born of curiosity and boredom. My breath caught for a moment as I watched the screen, half expecting something to happen just because I dared to hope it wouldn't. But the box remained still. Unmoving. Silent. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the tension wasn't just in me but in the air itself, an almost imperceptible vibration that made my skin crawl. My mind began to play tricks on me. Was that a shadow moving across the bed? No, it must have been a trick of the light. The clock struck midnight, and the realization hit me like a wave. I couldn't stay awake any longer. My eyes burned, my body heavy with exhaustion. Every rational part of me screamed that I should turn off the feed and go to bed. Yet, as I hovered over the phone, my thumb poised to lock the screen, a faint unease lingered. What if I missed something? What if the moment I looked away, something happened? I forced myself to set the phone down on the nightstand, the feed still running, the tiny box centered in the frame. I climbed into bed, my heart still racing despite my weariness. The relief I had imagined earlier didn't come. Instead, a heavy knot of dread settled in my stomach as I turned off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness. I pulled the blankets tighter around me, willing myself to sleep. But even as I closed my eyes, the glow of the phone screen burned in my mind, and the image of the box stayed with me, vivid and sharp, refusing to fade. The next morning, I woke with a start, my heart pounding as if it had been racing all night. I didn't stop to make coffee, didn't even think about a shower. My feet hit the floor, and I moved automatically, the pull of the spare room undeniable. There was no hesitation, no procrastination, only a gnawing urgency that clawed at my chest. The hallway felt longer than usual, the silence of the apartment unnerving in its totality. As I approached the door to the spare room, my pulse quickened, the faint memory of last night flickering at the edge of my thoughts. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, the cool metal sending a jolt through my fingers. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The scene inside stopped me cold. I gasped, the sound sharp and involuntary, echoing in the quiet room. The air seemed heavier, thicker somehow, and the hair on my arms and neck stood on end. I instinctively took a step back, my breathing shallow and uneven. There it was, just as I had left it, or almost. The wooden box remained in the center of the bed, its rough surface absorbing the light, unmoved and unopened. But something was different. My eyes were drawn to the bedstand, and a wave of unease crashed over me. The plastic container, the one filled with that dark, viscous liquid, was open. Its lid had been removed and placed neatly beside it, as if by careful, deliberate hands. The sight sent a chill spiraling down my spine, but that wasn't the worst of it. More than half of the blood was gone. The liquid that remained clung to the sides of the container, slow-moving and sticky, like it had been disturbed recently. My mind scrambled for an explanation, some rational thought to latch onto, but nothing came. I couldn't move, my feet rooted to the spot as the implications of what I was seeing sank in. I scanned the room, half expecting to see something, or someone, lurking in the shadows. The camera on the desk blinked its single red light at me, a silent witness to whatever had transpired in the hours I had been asleep. My phone. The video feed. I needed to check it. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from the container, from the undeniable fact that something, or someone, had been in this room. The silence pressed down on me, and for the first time, I felt the weight of my own reckless curiosity. Whatever I had invited in was no longer theoretical. It was real. My pulse raced as I sprinted to the bedroom, grabbing my phone with shaking hands. I almost dropped it as I fumbled to open the app. My breath came in short, shallow bursts as I accessed the video recording from the previous night. The timestamp glared at me, marking the hours I had been asleep while something had been happening in that room. Frantically, I skipped ahead in the footage, scanning for anything unusual. The minutes blurred together as I jumped forward in 2-minute intervals, my eyes locked on the unmoving image of the box and the plastic container on the screen. Nothing. Nothing. And then, something. I froze. The wooden box, so still before, now had its lid slightly ajar. My stomach plummeted, and an ice-cold chill spread down the back of my neck like freezing water. My thumb hovered over the play button, and with a deep, shaky breath, I pressed it. The footage played, the room bathed in dim light, the box trembling ever so slightly. The lid shifted, inching open as though nudged from within. Then, it opened wider, revealing something moving inside. I leaned closer, unable to tear my eyes from the screen. A tiny hand, gnarled, dark, and clawed, emerged, pressing against the inside of the lid. My breath hitched as the lid creaked open further, pushed by the small, otherworldly creature now climbing out. It was a Jenglot. The tiny, creepy little idol had somehow come to life. The thing was barely the size of a child's doll but carried an aura of menace far greater than its size. Its skin was dark and leathery, its head draped in wispy, matted black hair that clung to it like cobwebs. The face was grotesque, a twisted parody of something human, with sharp, jagged teeth glinting in the light. Its nails were long, curved, and knife-like, clicking faintly as it crawled onto the bed. I stared at the screen in disbelief, my mind screaming at me that this couldn't be real. It was a nightmare, a hallucination. But my pounding heart and the icy sweat on my skin reminded me otherwise. The Jenglot turned its back to the camera, its movements stiff and unnatural, as though its joints were unused to bending. It shuffled toward the bedstand, its hunched form silhouetted in the dim light. I watched, unable to look away, as it crouched in front of the plastic container. It gripped the lid with its tiny clawed hands and pulled, its whole body heaving with the effort. On the third try, the lid popped off with a faint snap. The Jenglot placed the lid carefully beside the container, its movements disturbingly deliberate. Then it lowered its head, the matted hair obscuring its face, and plunged it into the container. I could hear nothing from the recording, but I felt the intensity of its feeding as its small frame heaved and trembled with each gulp. My stomach churned as I watched the creature drink deeply, slowly, its back rising and falling with each grotesque motion. I must have looked as pale as a ghost, my mouth dry and my pulse deafening in my ears. This couldn't be happening. This thing couldn't be real. Yet there it was, its dark form bent over the plastic container as it drained its contents with horrifying precision. When it finished, the Jenglot straightened and turned slightly. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, its head tilted just enough to catch the camera's light, and its eyes glinted, a predatory, unnatural gleam from a face now smeared and dripping with blood. It walked back to the box, its movements smoother, more fluid now, as if the feeding had rejuvenated it. Reaching the box, it climbed inside with eerie ease, turning around and pulling the lid down as if tucking itself into a macabre, coffin-like bed. I thought it was over, but at the last moment, I saw them. Tiny, blood-stained fingers slipping inside before the lid closed completely. The image seared itself into my brain, and my composure shattered. I screamed. The sound tearing from my throat, and the phone slipped from my trembling hands. It hit the floor with a dull thud, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing, my breath ragged. The room spun around me as I clutched my chest, trying to process what I had just witnessed. I bolted to the spare bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me with a resounding bang that echoed through the apartment. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, and my vision blurred at the edges as though the very fabric of reality was unraveling. My legs felt weak beneath me, but I forced myself forward, stumbling into the kitchen as panic clawed at my chest. The faucet sputtered before unleashing a stream of icy water. I plunged my hands under it, splashing the freezing liquid onto my face again and again, the shock biting at my skin. It wasn't enough. I leaned closer, letting the cold cascade over me. Some of the water ran into my nose and mouth, and I choked, sputtering as it invaded my lungs. The sharp burn of oxygen deprivation grounded me just enough to pull me back. I collapsed onto the kitchen floor, coughing and wheezing, clutching my knees to my chest like a lifeline. My clothes clung damply to me, and the chill seeped into my skin, but I didn't care. The cold seemed to anchor me, pulling me back from the spiraling edge of my thoughts. I focused on my breathing, forcing the air in and out of my lungs with mechanical precision. In and out. In and out. The world around me stopped spinning, and my heartbeat, once a relentless drum in my ears, began to slow. I stayed there, seated on the cold linoleum floor, until the storm inside me subsided into a fragile calm. Eventually, I stood, my movements deliberate and measured. I peeled off my damp clothes and stepped into the shower, letting the hot water wash away the lingering chill. The steam wrapped around me, but it did little to soothe the knot in my chest. I dressed methodically, each action mechanical, and left the apartment without a second glance. The rest of the day passed in a fog. I wandered the city aimlessly, the sounds of traffic, chatter, and the occasional burst of laughter fading into a dull, meaningless hum. The streets felt surreal, their colors muted, their textures indistinct. My mind churned, circling the same unanswerable questions, unable to escape the image of the Jenglot and the note from my grandfather. It was real. When I finally looked up, night had fallen, and I found myself standing in front of my apartment building. I had no memory of how I'd gotten there. Most of the shock and confusion had drained from me by then, replaced by a hollow, clinical acceptance. My legs moved on their own, carrying me up the steps and into the apartment. Inside, everything was exactly as I had left it, as though the chaos in my mind had never touched this place. I moved with detached efficiency, stepping into the spare room without hesitation. The wooden box sat on the bed, silent and inert, its polished surface gleaming under the light. I picked it up, cradling it like something fragile but dangerous, and carried it back to the linen cupboard. I slid it onto its shelf, the same spot where it had sat for weeks, as if returning it could somehow contain the reality of what I had witnessed. Next, I retrieved the plastic container from the bedstand. The smell made my stomach turn, but I steeled myself. I carried it to the kitchen, emptied its contents into the sink without a second thought, and scrubbed the container clean before tossing it into the trash. The motions were automatic and mechanical, as if doing this with purpose could override the memories in my mind. Finally, I sank onto the couch, the apartment eerily silent around me. The weight of it all settled in my chest like a leaden stone. There was no denying it anymore. The Jenglot was real. The words in my grandfather's note, the message I had brushed off, they were real. I stared into the dimness of the room, letting the truth sink in. My hands were still trembling, but I didn't try to stop them. The silence pressed in around me, and for the first time in hours, I allowed myself to sit with the fear, the awe, and the undeniable certainty. It was real. The news came, as I knew it would. Shannon had been given a huge promotion at work, one that was impossible to ignore, even in our remote setups. The email announcement arrived early one morning, filled with congratulatory tones and praise for her achievements. I stared at the screen for a long time, my stomach churning with a mix of emotions I couldn't untangle. Relief. Dread. Guilt. But that wasn't the whole story. Shannon worked remotely, just like I did. Neither of us had ever set foot in the Melbourne office. My interview had been conducted online, and I had never needed to visit in person. Shannon, too, was based miles away and had no reason to travel to the physical office until she was suddenly asked to come in for a meeting. The reasoning seemed flimsy, according to the murmurs among my colleagues. Something about discussing future strategy with the senior leadership team. Still, Shannon made the trip. She traveled to Melbourne, entered the office building for the first time, and walked into what could only be described as a nightmare. The details spread quickly through the unofficial channels of our company chat. A newly installed air conditioning unit had dislodged from the high ceiling, falling directly onto Shannon as she passed beneath it. The weight and force were catastrophic. She sustained severe, permanent injuries to her neck and spine. I read the messages with trembling hands, each update driving home the horrifying reality. Shannon survived, but only just. The damage left her semi-reliant on a wheelchair for the rest of her life. The company, eager to avoid the media frenzy and inevitable lawsuit, offered her an enormous promotion. She accepted. No one could blame her. Officially, she was set for life. Financially, at least. Lucky Shannon. I tried to move on. I threw myself into work, redecorated my apartment, even started picking up new hobbies. But some things couldn't be erased. One day, I bought 4 new sets of linen for my bed. While at the store, I impulsively added 2 more sets for the spare bed. It felt necessary. The new sets of linen were stored in my bedroom closet. I haven't opened the linen cupboard in over a year now. I avoid even glancing at it, letting it become a shadowed, untouched corner of my apartment. It looms there, quiet and unassuming, yet heavy with the knowledge of what's inside. I don't want to open it. I don't need to. But every now and again, late at night, when the apartment is silent and the city beyond my windows has gone to sleep, I hear faint sounds coming from the linen cupboard, where the wooden Jenglot box is hidden. A soft creak. A subtle rustle, like fabric shifting against wood. I tell myself it's nothing, just the building settling, or my mind playing tricks on me. Still, I keep my distance. I know what's in there. And I know I'll never open it again.